You mentioned consistency in the book. When they have adequate narcissistic supply, they're on top of the world, but then they're perpetually bored and they often seek excitement or novelty. And I'm guessing this is what leads to some of the overspending that these people do, and certainly a lot of the cheating in relationships, which the previous aforementioned example, he can't stop cheating on people that he's with because he'll trade in a girlfriend he'll trade in the nice girlfriend for the one that has more followers on Instagram, literally. And it's like, it's a choice no sane person would make.
But it's not a sanity, right? I mean, I think the value system is different. I guess that's the way. And the motivation system is different. And I think in understanding when you're in a relationship with someone narcissistic, listen, the healthiest people amongst us are very clear on what motivates them to do what they do. Right? The more clear we are in our motivations, the more we're in line with our authentic selves, right? Like, a person might even be able to say like, yeah, the part of the reason I want that is ego, and owning that it's healthy. Mm-hmm. It's healthy to know that, because then when it doesn't work out, you're clear on why it stings, but it's not like a secret. The more secret things are, the more they sort of fester and come out in terrible ways. To tell you a narcissistic person has almost 0% awareness of why they do the things they do. So and this is a mistake people always make in an argument with a narcissist, why would you have done that? For example, why would you have cheated on me? I've been such a good da-da-da-da. And the narcissistic person will actually probably, because now shame has been brought up for them, they'll blame the other person, they'll defend themselves. It wasn't that big a deal. Let it go, la, la, la. But they'll never answer that question because they can't.
Mm-hmm. Because they're just not, like you said, not connected to that part at all. They're completely unaware.
No, there's no self-reflective capacity, right? The health, the work of being a person is to say, what is this about for me? So going back to what led me to say that is the motivations for healthy people listen, motivations could be things like achievement and affiliation and even power, right? We are social species. Human beings are social creatures, wanting to be with other people, care about other people. It's built into our DNA. We needed it for survival when we were small. We're not turtles that came out of an egg on a beach and go swim off and figure it out. We are human beings that take a long time to develop and need our caregivers. Attachment matters to this species. And so when people don't care about it, that does definitely speak that they've definitely stepped off the norm. And I think that challenge is that you're playing by a different rule book when you're in this relationship. You may value closeness and love and connection, but they value power and domination and control and validation. You're just, one of you is playing chess and one of you is playing checkers. I mean, they're both great games, but they don't make sense to be played simultaneously. And someone's going to get frustrated real fast.
Right. Yeah. You can't play them on the same board and expect a good outcome. What's scary is with the grandiosity, especially, you don't know which version to expect, right? If your partner is narcissistic and you're home and you're, I don't know, watching Netflix and making dinner or something, you don't know who's coming home. Is it the person who had a great day at work because their boss was like, great presentation there, Simpson? Or is it the person who their colleague that they don't like because they're constantly comparing themselves to them, that person got a compliment by the boss, so their entire life is now ruined for the next 48 hours? Who's walking in the door? That's the part that would give me just anxiety all day.
Well, that's why people in these relationships are always anxious, because there is no consistency. There is no communication about it. And because again, sort of admitting I didn't get the promotion because I wasn't as good as the other guy that brings up too much shame. Whereas someone else will say, I didn't get the promotion. I feel absolutely terrible and I need a minute. But I also have to know that he had better sales totals than me. Like, there's a healthy human being ultimately will get there. But that inconsistency and that unpredictability, which actually isn't unpredictability, it's really the narcissistic person's moods really literally are in lockstep with what happened with them that day. They lack that consistency, that through line. Even a person's like, okay, I had a bad day. They might even call the partner and say, listen, I'm going to take a longer drive, or I'm going to go to the gym on the way home because I need to let some of this out. I don't want to take it out on you. So there's enough of that self-awareness to know I had a terrible day. I don't want to take it out on others, or I better go to bed early or whatever. They don't do that. Everyone sort of, they can throw their tantrums everywhere. So really, in some ways, the narcissistic person sort of stuck at the developmental level of a 3 or a 4-year-old. I can tantrum anywhere, and that people are going to forgive me because I'm 3 or 4. So they do believe that people always have to show them grace, but they won't show grace to others. And that unpredictability, who's coming home, who am I going to get, what's going to set them off, means that anybody in one of these relationships does feel chronically anxious and chronically walks on eggshells.
Yeah, I just couldn't imagine living like that. Another thing that I thought was quite insightful, you mentioned the narcissists are chronically insecure, but it's not about high or low self-esteem, which I kind of tie those together, right? If you have low self-esteem, you're insecure, but it's not really about that. It's this lurking sense of inadequacy that's close to the bone, I think you said. And what's scary about this one is I'm like, wait, I think I have that too. I mean, but that in a vacuum doesn't make somebody a narcissist, right? It just makes them, I don't know, a little bit insecure, I suppose.
I always say that, especially when we talk about gaslighting is the pathologically insecure preying on the conventionally insecure. Most of us are what I call conventionally insecure, right? I mean, it is to be a healthy human being is to be aware of your strengths and weaknesses. And none of us have had a perfect run of it. So we will admit like, oh, that's a little bit of tender tissue for me. And I'm going to be careful with that. And so we know what our insecurities are and we slowly process them. And it takes a minute. It takes some miles on our tires to get there. Narcissistic people have what we'd call distorted self-esteem because they either think of themselves as the greatest, most perfect person in the world, or they fall into a big blob of shame. There's no middle ground. There's no middle ground like, yeah, I know some of this, but I don't know all of it. Like, I'm not perfect at this. That idea that for the narcissistic person to either be ordinary or imperfect, it really feels intolerable because all of this perfection and this grandiosity and this greatness is it's like a suit of armor around all this insecurity. In fact, the analogy I've been using more and more is that you have to think of the insecurity and the shame inside a narcissist as like a volcano that's always bubbling in them. And on top of that volcano is like a big, heavy metal manhole cover. And that manhole cover is all their defenses, their grandiosity and arrogance and all the rest of it. But every so often, that manhole cover gets kicked off a little. Maybe they don't get the promotion. Maybe somebody makes fun of them. Maybe they don't get enough likes, whatever it is, they get snudged, right? Well, then some of that lava and that explosive gook comes out, and that comes out in the form of rage. And they're either going to rage at someone overtly, like be overtly aggressive or verbally angry, or they're going to be passive aggressive, or they're going to withdraw, or they're going to withhold. But either way, they're going to have a strong emotional reaction to some of that schmutzy shame coming out of them. And they want to get that manhole cover in place. And how do you get it in place? By being the dominant one. And you do that through your anger.
Right. So you put other people underneath you or whatever. So so they're fragile, but
Very
they're
fragile.
also ashamed of being fragile from
Correct.
the sound of it. Oh, man.
That's right.
Do I have that one too? I don't know. Maybe I don't want to admit that. I don't know. I feel like sometimes I'm insecure and fragile, but I think you're right. It's an egg, not a cake, I think.
Right. And you're not lashing out at someone. So when we're having our fragile moments, we all have them. This is not saying that all the rest of us are not walking around with fragility. We're all walking around with it. It's what we do with it, and understand it as simply being part of being a human being.
I cry alone in the shower like everybody else.
Love it.
Narcissists clearly can't relate to others emotionally well if they're like this, right? What do they do if you are ashamed of your own vulnerability or your own fragility? I would imagine that somebody else wanting to share that with you, like their own stuff, that would be probably triggering, right? If their romantic partner's like, I feel this way, it's like, I don't want anything to do with that.
Right. So other people's emotion, in fact, the term emotion allergy has been used to describe narcissists, but it's actually more of a disgust or a contempt. It's as though when you open up those emotions, because it's bringing up that in some level, it's pinging that manhole cover again, right? That it's usually met with like, ugh, God, really? You're so sensitive. And then there's often a pathologization of that other person. You're so sensitive. You're so needy. You're so this. So what they've done is they've projected their shame onto that other person. So now the other person's the one with the problem. You're the person that's all these messy emotions. Who needs it? Right. And now the other person's left holding the bag that not only do they have an emotion, they're being told that they're dirty and bad. So that's how the narcissistic people do it. They fling it off. They're like made of Teflon. And they're always flinging off onto others. So the others around them often feel quite destabilized, but the narcissistic person kind of gets to stay pristine on the pedestal.
Yeah, the projection thing rings true. A couple of the people I know that are having a lot of these. Whenever I read one of your books, I'm like, oh, it's just still talking about this person, like dead on for them. A lot of projection and projection plus gaslighting, right? So it'd be like, you always do this. And it's like, what do I? I don't have any awareness of that. Well, that's because you're not self-aware enough to do that. And then it's like, but last week you did this thing, or last month you did this thing. And I'm thinking, no, you're the one. You're the one that you said that and did that. I didn't do that. And then you start thinking, am I just misremembering this? And then you have to ask other people if you even can, if they were there. And in one example, I lived with a person and his girlfriend, and she would, of course, back him up. But I think 15 years later now, they've been broken up for a long time. She wrote me an email, and I was like, hey, I'm surprised to hear from you. Yet she's like, well, I never actually really thought you were a bad guy, but I was dating this other person. So what was I supposed to do? And I was like, oh, okay. That pretty much shows me all I need to know. Because I was thinking either I've come such a long way in the last 15 years, and I'm sure that I have in many ways, or a lot of that was bullshit. And I was just being blasted with it all the time.
Yeah, no. Projection is projection is what we call a primitive defense. It's a very, very, it's a way that people sort of, again, like think of it as like an infant or something like that. This is not my problem. It's not my ick. It's your ick, right? And so then the person gets this again. They get to stay pristine with inside. So as soon as there's any kind of unconsciously unacceptable impulse or feeling, it gets knocked off into someone else, right? And that becomes, in fact, I always say an interesting tell on whether the narcissist is cheating on you is if you're not and they keep accusing you of cheating on them. I'm like, I have a feeling that their house isn't that clean. So it's whatever they're accusing you of is usually something that they're doing or struggling with. And so that's something to also pay attention to as well. But if you don't know what projection is while it's happening, you're like, what the hell? And then it becomes part of also the larger framework of gaslighting, where you're being accused of things that aren't true, being told there's something wrong with you, that you're not remembering things correctly. And like I said, because of empathy, initially we believe them.
Sure. Yeah. And nobody wants to be a bad roommate and a bad friend. Especially when, and then there's two of them, and you're like, well, yeah, maybe I am ruining their relationship. What was interesting is, finally, my mom and other people were like, I'm pretty sure that this is what's going on, and like laying it out more clearly for me. And I'd gone to see a therapist, and she was very much like, you need to move out. And I was like, I don't know if I can, whatever. I move out. 2 months later, they broke up because they couldn't blame me for their problems anymore, right? I was gone. And so the cannons had to move to her, and she was like, oh.
Correct. That's exactly right. That they need. And so in some ways, there often can be a third party to absorb the blows, right? And then the person in the relationship who may be invested in making the relationship work. And this is how people get stuck, Jordan, is that when we believe we love someone, our go-to isn't this person's toxic. It's how can I make this work? And how can I make this work means we take the responsibility on themselves. And when we see pieces of evidence that don't line up with this is a nice person, we're going to do everything we can do to either justify, rationalize, or find another explanation. So for a while, you were the justification. Oh, it's Jordan, it's Jordan, it's Jordan. Pull you out of the picture. And that's an interesting way when there is a third party, pull you out. And now it's mass destruction on the other person. The narcissistic person doesn't stop. They just find a new target.
Yeah. It was quite interesting to hear from this woman after 15 years and have her be like, sounds like we both had a bad breakup with so-and-so. And I was laughing because I was like, that's exactly kind of what it was, right? It was, I finally just left. And my therapist was like, look, she basically fired me as a client a month later because she's like, all the things that you were having problems with are just kind of gone now. And I was like, yeah, that was really interesting and something I should have seen clearly. And she's like, don't blame yourself, right? But it was quite interesting to see, because usually I would imagine as a therapist, you don't just rip off one Band-Aid and then everything is fine. There's usually a lot more going on. But I guess if you live with somebody like that and they're throwing all this stuff on you and you're not actually the problem, then when you leave, it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm not depressed anymore because I'm not being like abused essentially by somebody anymore. And I live on my own, and then you start making different friends and dating because you're not living with your two quote unquote best friends who actually hate you, right? So like things change pretty rapidly. So anyone who's in this situation, much easier said than done, but like getting out is probably a really good idea.
Oh, listen, the thing that I always approach this part of the conversation very tentatively, because A lot of people can't get out and they think, well, what then? Am I going to be in forever sort of in hell? No, you're not. So it's this. In an ideal world, I'm going to be honest with you. The gold standard, the best way it could go is you do not have to have contact with this person anymore. It's never, ever going to feel good. And anyone who's had that experience where they were able to get out of a narcissistic relationship after the initial shock, and if it wasn't too bad in the post separation period, they'll say, yeah, no, my life is much richer with this person out of it, right? For those who have to stay in these relationships for whatever long reason, and no one has to defend the reason they're staying, but they have to stay. Healing is very possible. It's something I really break down in the book. It really is. A lot of this has to do, though, with that moment, that radical acceptance moment, that penny drop moment when you realize I'm never, ever going to get what I need here. It's the day you realize I keep just dropping a bucket in this well and I keep getting no water. And you're like, yep, this is not ever going to give me water. And that you start building up a world outside of it. It could be friends. It could be taking a class. It could be a social group. It could be a healthy spiritual community. It could be an exercise class. It could be anything, but it's a place and existing friendships that you put more time into, that you realize that this is not the place to go. And there's a lot of grief around that because you're like, great, I'm in this marriage. It's just never going to be healthy. And I had to go outside of it. However, then I tell people, let's bring you back to the why of staying. You might be staying for kids. You might, and you listen, you might be staying for financial reasons. That doesn't always feel good because a lot of people will say, listen, someone dropped a bag of money on me. This would take care of a lot of my problems. It mean I could move out because in expensive areas, it's actually hard to go and start a new household, especially if there's not a lot of money in play and a person doesn't have steady employment. So there's a lot of things that might be at play here, but you definitely can still heal because once you hear it, see it clearly what it is, you'll be a little less likely to personalize it. You'll say, okay, this is not a me thing. That's why I called it. It's not you. This is a them thing. And this is how they treat everyone. And my bad luck was this was the person I am with. And where can I find the meaning and the purpose? Where can I find the fulfillments in my life? Where can I find the awe and joy? And always remember to never share it with them because they're just going to make fun of it.
Right, right.